I'm the founder of Fiker Institute, and I'm delighted to have you all with us here for a very special session in partnership with Dubai Culture on writing in the Gulf. The Gulf's literary sphere continues to emerge as a vital space for cultural reflection as well as intellectual exchange. Writing the Gulf Memory, Identity, and Literature, co hosted with our partners at Dubai Culture, is convening three very distinguished literary voices and practitioners, Dr Afra Atiq, Nujoom Al Ghanem, and Salha Obaid, to examine the intersections of writing, identity, and memory in shaping the region's contemporary literary narrative. Now, I want to turn to our phenomenal speakers to get first their reflections, and we'll start with Dr. Afra. I tend to follow where the seating arrangements are, and to have really each speaker's take on how they look at interpreting the title today, and identify our points of departure for today's discussion.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for having me, and to the Bay and the Fiker team. I love to be surrounded by books, so I'm insanely happy right now. I think for me, the main thing is that they're not separate from each other. Memory, identity, literature, culture, they're all kind of intertwined. And in my work specifically, I like to keep it that way because I think it's fluid, and I think literature has to be fluid, and writing, particularly in the Gulf, whether you're looking at novels, you're looking at poetry, you're looking at theater, script writing, there is always a sense of memory and an identity. So for me, it's very much fluid and very much intertwined.
Hello, good evening. Thank you, Dubai, for inviting us, and thank you for finding this beautiful space. And I would like to thank also Dubai Culture for thinking about us and inviting us to this amazing talk with Afra and Dr. Afra and Salha. Okay, I would like to begin with the identity, and I think identity begins with language. And when I say language, I mean because language is the living component, or the living thing that reserved culture and reserve personal history, and reserve also the memory. And linguists, for example, they estimated that the languages, including the indigenous languages, that they are dying every 2 weeks. Each language dies every 2 weeks, which is dangerous and incredible information. And that, which means 25 to 30 languages die every year. And for now, we have around 7,000 languages, but by the end of this century, half of them will be gone. Now, the loss of language is not neutral. I believe that it is the quiet erosion of identity. Now, in our culture, we have this beautiful habit that people, our wise people, they do. They try to memorize the Quran, not because they are, because of their devotion, but it is one way of reserving their language. And when you think about it, they want to save their memory by memorizing Quran. However, by saving their memory, they also save their language. By saving their language, they save their identity. By keeping their identity, they highlight their existence. this existence that they have existed and they will continue to exist.
Hi, good evening. Thanks, Dubai, for having us, and thanks for Fiker Institute and Dubai Culture actually for also choosing this subject. When I think about the identity, I think about it as an evolving creature. And I think it will be a dead society if the identity became stable for a very long time, because we need, to get adding to this identity and making it evolve more and more intellectually and socially and etc. But when I think about the identity situation in the Gulf in terms of the literature or the scene of literature in the Gulf, I think the identity in the Gulf is evolving really fast when it comes to the surrounding things with the people who are also coming to this place. While the literature, I feel it's keep trying to run behind this identity to keep, tracking it and seeing it. So there is a little bit of gap between what's happening when we are talking about the identity and between how the literature is trying to catch and writing it. And this will need maybe the evolving time to be, lasting for a longer time, to be captured in a good way. At the same time, when I think about my own experience with identity, it's an interesting, because when I started writing, I know that I think, and as I told you, I think, I dream, and I have my feeling in Arabic. But when it comes to my Emirati identity, when I started writing my short stories, I was thinking that if I put a distance between, my Emirati identity and my writing will be better. I don't know from where I get this idea. Maybe from the surrounding. I felt that if I didn't give my, characters a names that is related to the Emirati culture, if I put them, in a very vague place. So the character could be in Dubai or Doha or maybe in Egypt, also in any place, maybe in the West. The reader will find a better bond with the character. Until I started writing my first novel, and I wrote it actually as an experiment to try to find some answers about my own identity towards the city, which is Sharjah. So the whole novel, it might be a joke. It was me trying to find my own identity and, getting closer and closer to the place I'm living in, and, I'm evolving in somehow, some way. And it surprised me that the link and the bond between the readers from, Egypt, for example, or Morocco, or when I went to the international writing program and they translated some part of the novel, the bond was still there. So I was thinking about the identity, as a literature in a different way. So it's the more you show your uniqueness, the more you will find the bond with the others. But it depends also on how you will choose the subject about, this modern identity all over the world, because we are sharing almost the same complexities. So how we can write this in, literature and find the bond. And I think this is a good thing that we need to focus in our writing when we come towards writing the identity in the Gulf.
And I think just to also follow up with you on this, how do you see Gulf writing or the experience of writing from a Gulf perspective different from wider Middle East literature? And we'd also like to extend it to the rest of the panel as well.
I think when it comes to Gulf, as I say, they are trying to, to capture what's happening with the evolving, surrounding around us, which is also including the identity. So there will be almost a distance in sometimes in capturing these details. And also when, when I like started reading some of the short stories that was written in the UAE during the 70s maybe, or the beginning of the 80s, usually they were thinking about the identity of the United Arab Emirates, which was still evolving or like establishing as an identity that need to be saved that is threatened somehow, some way. Because, you know, the city is getting bigger and bigger. There is a lot of strange faces coming. So they were thinking about, you know, the new language also will came. Maybe it will threaten the Arabic language, for example. So this is how some of the things that I started, you know, noticing from the things I've read during that time. And when I go to write, you know, some of the literature, for example, in Syria and Egypt or in Morocco, I think they have different, you know, subject to think or to talk about, which is include identity. But the identity there, it's not a very big question as I see it, because, you know, it's I don't say that it's not evolving, but it has the time period where it developed in a certain way. So they have a lot of different subjects other than the identity to think about. Maybe, you know, the relationship between, for example, the person and the power in the city or on the place, the complexities of, you know, everyday living in some certain places like Egypt. So this is how I say it. But in Gulf, it was mainly focusing on trying to capture this evolving identity and fearing what will happen to this identity, because everything is evolving really fast.
Okay, I think we have two situations here. I've been around for quite some time. And before the 80s, for example, the subject matters that they were quite popular in literature or in form, in terms of form, it was poetry. Poetry was quite spread, quite popular among people. And then when the novels started becoming the new form, people shifted from poetry to novels because there was a motivation, more competitions, more prizes. And also because, as Salha said, because of the rapid change in society, because the new questions that got onto the surface, and because of the complexity of the lifestyles that began to be an issue, a personal or individual issues. That's why I think maybe to say identity here will be irrelevant, because it is more like a style. We had, this, kind of exploring your own writing style, exploring your own language, and working on that. So your voice is going to be distinguished than the others, or to be at least, different. What new things you are going to introduce to the reader or to the audience in this region. That's my view on it. Yes.
I think just to add on to the things that were said, I think there are defining features of writing from a Gulf perspective or looking at literature from the region. A lot of it has a very deep tie to landscape. So you'll see this reflected in a lot of poetry and a lot of novels, sea and desert and that kind of nearness to the landscape. I think that sits within some more of a, like, almost a narrative architecture of the building blocks of what makes up the literature. And then comes the identity that comes with that. So what is happening on the interior of these things? What are the conversations that are happening within households? What are the conversations that are happening in society, and those broader questions creating more literature and this kind of ever evolving, I would say, identity. And then the other thing is different forms. So looking at novels, but then looking at perhaps the introduction of short stories, different forms of poetry, and multiple perspectives, creating this, I guess, identity tapestry almost. And I think that is what really is reflected in literature from the Gulf, especially because if you think about even just the lifestyle or regular architecture, the things that were witnessed over a generation or two, or a single lifetime, going from, say, al-Arish to the introduction of concrete, steel, glass, to then having infrastructure and things like that. So it's all of this went, in my opinion, went parallel with the way that literature went. And then you have the introduction of different voices from different places. And then there's also not specifically just printed things or written things, but you're also looking at song, you're looking at theater. So it's a whole ecosystem almost that has grown in parallel with these changes that we've seen over the last couple of generations. And I think there's also a sense of layered timing, in the sense that there are things that are nostalgic but still sit next to something that is more kind of contemporary.
I also wanted to get your view, Doctor, on the question of language, because language is also layered. It's not just Arabic and English, it's also Gulf dialect, it's Emirati dialect. How do you see your relationship with, especially in your poetry, you do tend to bring in terms from all over, but also it really is, it makes your poetry style really a signature style. How do you, where do you sit on the language versus identity debate, if you see it as being a versus format?
It was to be perfectly honest, it was a versus conversation for the longest time. And for the longest time, it was, this language is used for these things, and this language is used for that things, and this one is more formal, and this one is more casual, and this one is more in this. And it was at this almost crossroads of just very intense language thought and practice. And I think a lot of this has to do with my own experience, but it was an either or situation for the longest time. And I was really struck by what Salha was saying about how when she wrote her first novel, she was expecting something, and then she discovered that her relationship with language and culture went beyond what she was expecting. And that's very much what happened to me. I wrote a poem about my late grandfather, الملهمة, and I wrote the poem shortly after he passed, and I wrote the poem completely in Arabic, and it just wasn't, it felt incomplete to me. And I wrote the poem again in English, and it didn't do what it needed to do. And one of my friends had said to me, Afra, you need to write this as a bilingual poem. And I thought to myself, that is insane. That is absolutely insane. There's no way I can do this. I cannot have these two languages sit together in the same poem that has the same message. And I did it. I wrote it. It's one of my favorite poems. And it was only at that moment, when I wrote the poem in that way, that I truly and completely grieved his death. And this was years after his passing. And so I think I have a relationship with language that is, it's not perfect. It's not very smooth, but it's mine. And I think we all have our own personal relationships with language. And I think we feel different things in different languages. We think about different things in different languages. I write in technically four different languages, in Arabic, English, French, and Python coding. And there are specific, it is a language, I learned it the same way, but I approach those languages almost from different perspectives. They're all me, but they just serve different purposes. And I think when we look especially at taking work that's Emirati literature to a broader, a global audience, we have to think about these things. We have to think about what language are we using, what terminology are we using, are we going to do something colloquial, are we going to write it in modern standard Arabic, are we going to write the work in English, because there are also things that don't translate, and there are also things that when you translate them, they lose they lose something else. I have tried for many, many, many years to find the translation that I feel is the right translation for كلمة النخذة. And there isn't. For me, it was نخذة and غربة that I really, when you think about like الغربة, there's a sense of longing and estrangement. There's a sense of it's all of these things that when you try to translate it, you don't get the same thing. And I really shout out to all of the translators that work in literature, because it's difficult. It is difficult work. It's a rewrite.
I try to translate that for my films, by the way. The best translation of غربة is alienation.
Can I just ask you, because you were talking about it and I'm fascinated by your process. When you translate your work, do you find that you have to translate it first before it goes to a translator, or do you just, I need to توكلين, and you just give it to the translator?
Okay, thank you, Afra, for asking me this question, because, by the way, I accept translation invitations only to the language I understand, which is English. And this is because at least I can review what it's, like the translation, and I could also discuss the translation with the translator. However, for other languages, I get my work translated to other languages without being involved in the process, and I don't know the result. But at least when I am attending any of the festivals, I see the reflection on I see that audience response, and I just ask them, was the translation good? But how would they know that if it was good or not? Because they never know the original language. So it's a tricky, it's not easy.
And Salha, you've told us how you use both colloquial terms and formal Arabic in your novels. How do you decide what's better for maybe which character or which story?
Yeah, and the things that regarding the words that is hard to be translated, الله يغرب لك شو يترجمونها.
The $1 million question.
It was a dialect that is between two characters, and one said Allah يغرب لك to another one, and the translator was, just confused. Yeah. So there is. For me, it's not towards the language in Arabic or English. For me, it's in the same language, because, as you said, there is the formal Arabic language and the Emirati dialect, which is differ from the dialect itself, but differ between a place to place. And when I started writing, because, for me, the game of the language, the game of also the creative writing, it's not also towards the subject of, the story I'm writing. It's also towards the language and the shaping of the sentences in the language. And usually when I do this, I enjoy doing it in, the formal Arabic language. I try to sit, and I know in my mind how the sentence will be, but I try to challenge myself in writing it in a very different way, and, moving the sentence that I feel that it's really had a special technique for me to be in the story itself. Regarding the dialect, actually, it's a kind of challenging, because I prefer the dialect between the characters to be in the Emirati dialect, because I feel that it will give a special identity or a unique identity to the novel itself. And I love when the reader will read this story, he will recognize that this is an Emirati writer, and they have, their special dialect. But the challenge will come that even in the Gulf, you will notice that, for example, in Saudi Arabia, they might not understand actually the Emirati dialect. So I keep it as light as much as I can, but I insist to put some, a very unique and special words in, the Emirati dialect. And I see how it will go. And I remember also some of, brilliant novels I've read during the Arabic or through the Arabic literature. I found some, difficulties. For example, when I read عرس الزين for الطيب صالح, it's actually a very challenging novel because it was written in the whole Sudanese dialect. And when you read it, it's really challenging, but I find it also really enjoyable because I kept, searching about the meaning and trying to guess. And I will never forget, for example, this novel because it gave me special bond in this, challenge I went through. Regarding the translation and the English language, actually, this is a special or a personal thing. It's not towards the writing. I discovered, although that I write in Arabic, I think in Arabic. And I think it's an identity problems toward, the modern Gulf citizens maybe, or modern Arabs, because I noticed that I will be really happy to write in Arabic, but it's really hard for me to express my feeling in Arabic. So I will use the English language. And I noticed that, and I started thinking, where did that came from, and how our identity is complex, that we also now are facing, this distance between our feeling and our own language. And I think it's one of important identity questions that we need to ask also.
Because I also think it's a very common feeling also just in our day-to-day that there are some things that are easier to say in English than they are in Arabic. So this how identity and language is intertwined, or at least from my perspective, when you will talk in Arabic, you have to think twice about what you will say. It has to be formal. My parents will hear it. My uncles English, it gives you a bit of a space to make mistakes, and that's okay. So it's also psychological how we move from one language to another, and this is also not a new phenomenon, because there was when Edward Said passed away, Mahmoud Darwish wrote a poem about that, and he talked about his conversation with Edward, and Edward said, I have two languages, one that reflects my dialogue with a higher self, which is Arabic, and one that is easier for me to be myself in. So I think it's not just literal or linguistic, it's also psychological. And
I just wanted to add something to what Salha said. Now, she was talking about the dialect, okay? And this could be understandable in the Arab world because we share one language, which is the formal Arabic language. However, when the work gets translated to other languages, no reader can have any clue about your dialect, whether it was Sudanese or Emirati or Egyptian. It will be a language and that's it. So the uniqueness, if we keep working, if we keep using the dialect only for certain audience, which share with us the same mother language, but when it gets translated, it doesn't become an issue at all.
One question I think all of us within the field grapple with is, why is the Gulf literary voice absent from the global stage? So it's not just translation, but also, is it a talent issue? No. Is it a publishing industry issue? No. Where is the Gulf voice in global literature? And I ask this question knowing that we often, when we say global, it often means Western. It also often means English publishing industries. So how do you explain the absence of a Gulf literary voice?
Okay, I will answer this because the microphone is here. And also because I've served for so long on the board of trustees for the international prize for Arabic fiction, Al-Bukar. I don't believe that the Gulf literature hasn't gotten the chance to be translated. It's it has gotten the chance. And for example, Saoud Sanousi's book get translated, Muhammad Alwan get translated, all those Khaliji writers, novelists who got into the short list that get translated, which is an equal opportunities with other Arab writers. Now, we are talking about all the Arab world here again. Now, the Arab world don't get the same privilege of getting translated. And I'll tell you something, we have to be serious about this. Our writing, our Arabic writing, in our culture, in the way we write Arabic, we don't have the same structure that other languages, especially English. And because I studied English, I know the structure. The English, the subject is there, the verb is there, and everything, the structure of the sentence has to be in a certain way. However, for us as Arabs, we tend to beat around the bush. We tend, it is natural, even in our speech. We like to explain a lot. We think that this is kind of, this is kind of a flow. We flow, and there is a beauty in this. However, this beauty cannot be translated into other languages. So this is one of the difficulties that translators face. Until today, they face this difficulty. This is one thing. The other thing, the Arab world is still closed. It is not open to the other world. And by the way, you get it translated when you have agents within your culture who take that responsibility on them. Like, for example, if somebody knows, for example, Japanese, and decides that his literature. When I say his literature, means the literature of his land, the literature of his country, deserves to be translated, and he takes an individual responsibility and starts to translate it. This will take the literature to other stage, to other places, to other languages, of course.
I think you covered it. I love that you used the word Khaliji. Okay, so for me, I don't think our problem is absolutely 100% not a lack of talent. Talent is plentiful. It is growing. It is multiplying. Talent is not the issue. The challenge, in my opinion, is more structural. And when we look at the structure of how things are set up, the path of a writer, they're often very different. It's not the same path as becoming Salha, forgive me, I know you're an engineer, but it's not the same path as becoming an engineer. The creative path is often one that's not linear. It's often one that has ups and downs, and sometimes more downs than up. And I'm an amazing writer one day, and the next day I should not be doing this. I need to, it's not a linear journey. And so the structure usually doesn't really reflect that, because you're also looking at writers that are at different stages in their careers and in their journeys. It's not I'm a fresh graduate and therefore I'm at this stage, and I'm a postgrad and therefore I'm at that stage. It's actually quite different. The other thing that I think we really need to keep in mind is that structurally we are quite young. So we've been writing for centuries, but as structure, as the infrastructure for the journey of a writer, it's actually quite, I would say, new.
So you mean publishing houses
and just the things that sort of will facilitate bringing literature to a global stage. But I will say this: there is a very real and very, very big interest in voices from the Gulf. There's almost a hunger for it. And I think with the talent we have, with the right infrastructure in place, we can take those voices, and it's already happening. It's been happening, and I think there's just different things that maybe can have a little boost. And there's always room for improvement. And I always say, here it's not about trial and error. It's trial and improvement. It's benchmarking, it's best practices, and really finding the best solution for that. But the solution needs to be flexible, because the journey again of a writer is not clearly defined. The genres are also not clearly defined. If you look at like creative industries, we tend to think of it as, okay, music, advert, noveling. That's not a word, is it? No, novel writing, and looking at them as separate industries. But what is actually happening on the ground is there's all these hybrid industries. So if Nujoom were to make a film, and she makes amazing films, it is considered as a film. But within that film, there's also music, there's also script writing. So then there's like literature, there's cinematography involved. So it becomes, you can actually put it into different genres. And I think we need to account for that. And I apologize that I used you both as examples in making my point.
And we need good translators.
I want to add one point towards this. There is also a political point of view, because when we are talking about the Gulf states, it will be apart from the Middle East. And usually, I noticed there is a lot of translation choices towards the Middle East are focusing on the places where, there is a lot of conflicts. For example, after 2003, they were focusing really on translating the literature from Iraq, for example, because the conflict was happening there. During maybe the last 12 or 13 years, there is a lot of focus on translating the Syrian, for example, literature, because they were, they were curious to know what's happening towards Syria and inside Syria, and the conflict was developing there through the years. And I think maybe during, the next few years also, there is maybe curiosity to try in translation, maybe the Sudanese literature, modern literature, and they are thinking there is nothing interesting happening maybe in the Gulf states, because they see it in their mind. It's not a very, complex place. There is nothing happening really there other than, building more buildings and, towers and this stuff. They are not curious as they should towards what's happening, for example, to the humans here. And every time, like I'm traveling and I'm doing speech, when I stand in front of people, I started asking them, what do you know about, UAE, United Arab Emirates? And they tend to know a lot about, the infrastructure about the place and how it developed as, a city from the surrounding. But they almost know nothing about the Emirati person. They almost know nothing about, our, own conflicts. And their term of conflict and complicity, it's caged in that stereotype about the Middle East as a place of conflict, war, and this things is what should be translated. I think what we need is to work more in, translation grants, and maybe a cooperation with, a well-known Western translation houses to make, these interesting stories about the Gulf states and about the complicities that we can find the bond between us and them to be there. Also, I think we need, I forget the point. It was in my mind. I think also we need to focus on the idea of not, reflecting the Middle East as a place of wars and conflicts as they wanted. Yeah, I was going to mention also there is another stereotype about the Gulf. They are curious to read about it, which is sometimes, in their mind, the Gulf is still a place of pearl diving and, the poverty that was related to that time. And they are interested in seeing this, folklorial picture of the Gulf. And as I told you, I had an incident in this, because when we were working on the process of a translation, it might be a joke. It was, two verses of the story. One was happening in the modern Sharjah and Dubai, and the other one in, the Sharjah during the 30s. And the Western translation house, or the Western, publishing house was, keen in during the editing of the novel itself for the translation, to remove a lot of parts of the modern Sharjah, which was the main part of the story happening there, because it was actually made about, this gap and understanding between, different generation in the UAE, although the time period is very short. So, and by that time, I decided to stop, the translation process, because it's not the right thing. So there is a stereotype about the Gulf. They want to keep saying it. And there is also a bigger stereotype about, the Middle East, that it's a place of conflict and war. They are curious to know about it.
One question I also grapple with a lot, and I'm sure you have in your different international participations, I think there used to be a time where we think positively about wanting to educate the world about us and coming from a more goodwill place. But I think we're increasingly reaching the point of questioning, why is other regions' ignorance our responsibility? Is it our responsibility to be, to fix these ideas or these stereotypes? How do you see that in your work? Do you still have the appetite to educate and correct these stereotypes, or should we move towards a direction of this is who we are and the world has to catch up?
Okay. Can I? Yeah, okay. Look, just before going there, I want to comment on what Salha said about the stereotypes. Yes, we are still, the West, especially the West, they perceive us as, with the same Orientalist lens, okay? And on top of that, also the stereotype goes deeper into this is, this is land is, and these are rich people, they have oil, they are spoiled, they are ignorant or illiterate, and this baggage as well. However, we are not the only nations that are viewed this way. Also, we have to take that into consideration. If, for example, the whole East wasn't the interest of the West, the whole East was, neglected, and only recently they started translating work from Korea, for example, from other places, from China, from Japan, and these cultures, they have very rich literature, very rich culture, and so we are not alone, viewed in this way. Now, when it comes to the other aspect about, we are we part of the center of interest for the whole world because of the issues that are embedded in our literature or in our films or in our art? Let's, be honest also. Yes, we don't have strong stories. Okay? And when I say strong stories, I mean the way they think about us. Okay? The way they portray us. They want us to be like the starving. They want to hear stories about the rape. Now, yes, we have these issues because we are just like any other society in the world. However, we are not raised in a way to express ourselves freely. This is the way we are raised. It has nothing to do even with censorship. It's our personality. And honestly speaking, sometimes I attended several conferences and festivals for fundraising for my films, for example. They don't see that our films have something, like the films valuable for them, and they call the juices. And they are not interested in this. They want drama and conflict that suits the image they created about us in this part of the world.
How do you see it, Doctor?
I think that number one, the best way that I have found to approach this is to do what you do and to do what you do well. And your work speaks on your behalf. And for me, that's been the way that I've approached things, because it is exhausting. It's exhausting having to over-explain yourself, having to over-explain why you do certain things, why we do certain things, why did you choose this word, why is it, and it's also very difficult to have a conversation that's framed within news headlines. If within that conversation, and I'm not speaking about any particular incidents, but it's difficult and it's exhausting, and it's already exhausting being a writer. It's already exhausting being a creative, and on top of this, you have to you have to represent, and for me, representation matters. It's a responsibility that I don't take lightly, but it is one that is exhausting, because you also encounter audiences that are determined to misunderstand you. And it doesn't matter what it is that you say, but on the flip side, you encounter audiences that embrace you, that love the work, that approach it with a sense of openness and a sense of curiosity. So it goes both ways, and it's something that you always have to balance. But I think it's something that each writer, I would say, has encountered at one point or another, and it is tiring, but it's also it's a long game. You have to see the end result and keep going towards that end result. And like I said, we do not have a lack of talent. It is abundant, and I don't really use that word a lot, but it is abundant. In that sense. But I do also want to bring up that we do talk a lot about translation and the importance of translating work, but there's also a big number of writers that write in different languages already. So that's also something that helps, this multilingual literature.
I have a point to add to this, because it was also my thoughts, to educate the others. What do we mean by the others? And as you said, Dubai, we usually to think about the others, or the global perspective, as the West. But I had this translation experience when a collection of short stories was translated to Mozambican language and Portuguese, and I went to Mozambique actually, because I wanted to see how they will read my stories, and how would they reflect to the characters there, and to some some parts that is related to the United Arab Emirates there. And it was an educational experience, not for them, also for me, because they kept saying, for example, when we are talking about the female characters, especially in one of the stories, which is the white thread, there is a lot of similarities between the Emirati female, for example, and what she's going through with the African female, and what she's going through in that state, in that place. So why we keep think about educating others towards the West? Why we just widen our sights to another places of the world. And I discovered there also, when we are talking about the identity and the language itself, that sometimes the translation process, it's a way also to finding the identity for others. Because in this experience, when I went there, I think about the language as, as a thing that I can touch, I can see, I can write in Arabic, I see the Arabic. And when I write the story, I see the words in my mind. I discovered there when I went that it was translated to the Portuguese, because it's the formal language there that being used in Mozambique, because it was under the under Portuguese colonization. And I discovered also they have around 60 tribal languages there in Mozambique. 5 of the biggest tribal language was also some of the languages that being chosen for the stories to be translated in. And I was shocked there when they explained for me that this is this project, and translating this story as a written stories with those languages was a way to rewrite these languages. Because when the Portuguese left, they left them with the Portuguese language, and not all of them were educated actually. And there was also those tribal languages, was a verbal languages. They cannot see the language. And it was, a shock for me, because I kept asking them, what do you mean that you cannot see the language? And a lot of young girls, they cannot read and write actually, because in the house, they speak this tribal language, and it's a verbal language. They cannot write or read in Portuguese, so they are illiterate. So for me, the whole experience was an educational experience for me, because I discovered, a different form of the identity and the relationship between the identity and language. And I also discovered there is a lot of similarities and bond that can be created with different parts of the world other than, the West.
Before I ask my concluding question, I want to check with the audience if anyone has a question to any of our speakers. Yes.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Dubai, for this beautiful place, and thank you all for joining today. I'm just curious about the East, meaning from Iran, India, all the way to Japan, China. Were there any books about Gulf writers that have been translated to these regions, and what was the feedback there?
You've given us homework to do, which unfortunately we cannot Google now on spot. But it speaks to this idea of like, how do we look at different regions as markets instead of just purely capitals like London, Brussels, France.
And I can
There were some initiatives and collaborations, but I would say those were very individual projects. And some of the artworks or some of the verse for poetry, for example, get translated to Chinese because of that collaboration. Some also of the books get translated to other languages because, for example, Sharjah was the guest of honor in one of the countries, so they would translate some books. Yet, I don't think the issue is a translation. Translation is a beautiful word and it is a beautiful initiative. I would, I would ask if the translation was good enough to reach people, to have an impact on the reader. That's what that's what is not in our hands.
Any other question? We have 3 questions.
Just, my name is Renato. I'm from Brazil, and I'm hoping I can read the Mozambique Portuguese translations of your work. it's not a question, but a comment. I've been here in Dubai for a little bit more than a year and been living in different places over the last almost 20 years. And when I was deciding to come here, there's an issue, a lot of Western stereotypes that we had about Dubai, about a place that of the shining lights and everything that I really took into account to deciding over here. And I'm really glad to say that I was very wrong about the stereotypes that I had in my mind when I was deciding to come here. So when we had the questions here about the stereotypes and what can be done to spread around this mystique that they have in the Western, my comment over here is that do push to break those stereotypes, because it's very good. Like when we are here, I was talking with my friend over here to come that Dubai is not only what we see on those social networks and other things. My wife had a lot of concerns. She also like broke almost a lot of the stereotypes. So the more we have about not only in the Western world, but other parts of the world to break those stereotypes, the better.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Dubai, for orchestrating all of this and this amazing place, and thank you for joining us today. So my question is about the relationship of identity and literature. So as you mentioned, Dr. Afra said that identity is ever-changing, which is evident. So, and Ms. Nujoom, you also clearly stated that language is directly affects identity, as we all saw. Ms. Salha, also you translated, and you also, in your writing, you put the dialect of Khaliji to show the identity of the person talking. So it's clearly evident that it's related. However, with the idea that is ever changing, my question is, how important is it to hold on to our identities, or should we be open to its ever changing nature? So that's my question.
So I think thank you. I'm pretty loud. I think understanding or accepting that identity evolves does not necessarily mean letting go of your identity. And I think with a lot of discussions that we have specifically within the literature sector, there's a lot of confusion between holding on to your culture and cultural significance and identity, and the two are definitely intertwined in many different ways. But I think as identity evolves, as life evolves, as literature evolves, as new forms develop, it becomes important to kind of have the two together, and it doesn't necessarily mean one or the other. And I'm somebody I am very much, it's either this or it's that, and there's nothing in the middle. I mean, in all areas, most areas of my life. So I understand that that struggle really well, but I don't necessarily think that it has to be either or. Especially, we're very attached to our culture. We're very attached to our language, and we're very attached to very much attached to the landscape and to the stories and the history. And being attached to that does not necessarily mean that the identity of all of those things doesn't change.
Okay, I think this is a very good question. Thank you. Look, it depends on how you perceive your identity. For example, my language is my identity. But do you know what is my language? Anything I do is my identity, including the thoughts that are embedded in what I do, which are related to the culture, which are related to the landscape, which are related to who I am and this geography and this world. Yeah.
Okay, regarding the stereotypes, I would like to, add to that. There is a nice book to Zygmunt Bauman. It's called Strangers at Our House. Did you read it? Yeah, okay. It's nice. And it's a very nice book because during these modern days, we have an access to every single information. And if you wanted to know how the people of the UAE, or especially Dubai, living, behind this glamorous facade, you will find. And I don't know why, and especially in this book, he was saying that there is a lot of information, there is a lot of people that we are engaging with them behind, these screens, and we don't actually know them because we don't have, the enough curiosity to search deep. So they will remain strangers, and we will remain also strangers to them. So I think with the stereotypes, we just have to be there, and we just to keep writing, and we just need to create, these keep creating this conversation between them and us, and also try as much as we can, as I said, to not think about the others and their stereotypes as only a place that is related to the Western world. There is a lot of other parts in the world that we need also to go and to focus in. Regarding our identity, I think Khalfan, if for example, if he's a person from Sharjah, could have the same identity crisis of Diego, who's living maybe in Brazil. Is it a right name? Do you use? Okay. So I think it's not towards, because the identity could be a lot of things. When I'm using my name, for example, when I'm using my language, when I'm using my surrounding. But I think when we are creating literature and we are creating a story, and when I'm thinking, for example, the first novel I was really thrilled about, it was The Brothers Karamazov of Dostoevsky. When I read it when I was 14, I didn't think about, these people who are living in Russia with, certain identity. I was, engaged with the story, with the thoughts, with how, this psychological things was happening and this dark sides of the people until I reached the end. And I think this is what we need to search about when we are reading and writing literature. It's not about, I keep creating, the people with, this the superficial thing about the names and focusing on the names, maybe how they are wearing as the only perspective of identity when are creating a story. There is also an international or a human identity that we are sharing when we are writing a story, and this is what we are focusing in. And by being open, it's not necessary that we don't use, our name and our surrounding in our stories.
We have time for one more question.
Assalamu alaikum. So my question is also regarding identity, but it more touches on the flip side, because people, when they talk about identity, especially in the UAE, they talk as if we have a homogeneous identity, which we don't. From Abu Dhabi to Ras Al Khaimah to Fajr, like most people, they have different identities, and even from the coastal side to the rural side, from the mountains to the desert, everybody has a different identity and a different way to live. And unfortunately, like I think I've seen in Saudi novels and Omani novels, I've seen that representation in kind of like tribal differences and ecosystem differences in the country, but unfortunately in the UAE, I have not seen that at all. Very rarely, maybe they'll mention something about, but it's not represented within the characters. It's just mentioned, represented. It's just mentioned, So yeah, that's just. I'm wondering, how do you see that, like with the future of novel writing here in the UAE, and do you think that there will be representation, or do you think that we're at a point where we're moving past that?
We have one identity, but we have different lifestyles. We have different styles, okay? And look, we, like in art, and I include writing when I say in art. Anything that is creative is art. In art, you don't necessarily have to make the art or the identity to be described in the art. The art has to have the identity speaks within it by itself. You have to feel it, not to read it as a description. If you want to read the art as a description, then you go to something else, something like history, something, like a different genre, but not creativity. Because in creativity, there is this margin of imagination also, and you have to allow that. And that's how, like the beauty, the difference, like for example, when you read to Salha, her novel, and when you read to someone else, Muhammad Alwan, or another, or شو يسمونها جوخة الحارثي from Oman. You see, we belong to one identity, but we have different voices. That's what I meant.
I think I want to conclude our session with a policy recommendation that you have. So if we look at our current state of writing, particularly in the UAE, publishing industry, etc. What's one thing we can perhaps proactively propose that could better support writers, and not just in terms of like writing competitions, etc. But what do we need? Infrastructure was used a lot in this conversation today. What's one policy recommendation you think would help not just empower writers, but inspire people to become writers in the UAE? Dr. Afra, we can start with you.
I think that one, the policies surrounding anything creative, specifically literature, it has to be treated like public policy, in the sense that it has the same kind of facets. It needs investment, it needs structures, it needs infrastructure, which I think I've said 90 times since I've been sitting here. But I think it needs to be super honest. It really needs to be viewed in that sense, in the sense that it is a whole ecosystem. It's not just the writer. So you're looking at all different kinds of literature. You're looking at novels, you're looking at poetry, you're looking at academic writing, you're looking at a whole ecosystem, and it needs to be a holistic solution. And you need to create that kind of environment where everybody's at the table having these discussions to find a solution, because the issues that a translator faces are very different than the issues that a scriptwriter faces. They're very different than the issues that a poet faces, and so everybody needs to have this kind of seat at the table in creating this infrastructure. And I think quality control is a big one.
Literary critique.
Literary critique. I have found that the most in my experience, and especially with younger writers, things are taken so personally. Again, they agree with me outside that I mean,
Students are.
probably my students, that there's this idea that if somebody doesn't like your work, it means they don't like you as a person. And it's very difficult to, and I've been through that, and Salih and I have this discussion quite a bit. And it's to separate content from form, right? In that way, and to also create this culture of critique. You can have a valid point. You can debate. You can critique. You can have a different opinion, because at the end of the day, this is how things grow. Because you want that level of literature. Nobody wants anything mediocre. I mean, if that's your thing, that's fine. But if we really want high quality literature, then it needs to be a holistic solution where everybody is at the table, all these different kinds of different forms, different languages, and also experimenting with new forms of poetry or new forms of writing or different genres as well. So I think all of those things and understanding that it's gonna be like I said, you have to be in this for the long haul.
I think we need a strong foundation, and a strong foundation comes from education. Our education up to this moment hasn't been strong enough, and I've been working as a mentor. I used to work as a trainer, and I used to also work as a training, the head of training department. So I've been watching what the graduates, the level of graduates coming from our universities and our colleges, and we need to strengthen education and to focus on education throughout. Like the foundation from elementary up to the highest level of education. And this is a governmental responsibility. Also, we need to stop thinking about language as the competition between Arabic and English. And I suggested when we were talking, discussing together and preparing for this talk, that let's think, for example, in having 3 languages to be studied from first grade until high school or even going up. Also, we need the support in terms of training, in terms of residencies, in terms of publication, in terms of tours, taking the students, for example, on tours internationally and nationally. And by the way, we have very good example. Sharjah, for example, they are invest a lot in the new generation. They teach them to be critics. They teach them to be to be creative, to be artists, to shine. We need a lot of that.
From my point of view, I think there is a lot of policies that has been, coming around during the last few years. That is, use the headline of, art and literature, but it's not sustainable. I think it's one of the main problems. Yeah. It's not sustainable because, after maybe 3 or 4 years, you will not find, the same program that was before, and they just stopped it. Although they had, maybe got a really good result, and they don't really invest on the results, the continuity of this. This is one of the things. And the other things, I think, I think that I need to add to Nujoom is with the engagement with, what's happening outside when we are using about, when we are talking about the scene of the literature around the world. And by engaging, we don't only, we don't only need to focus on the book fairs or the short-term festivals. We need, a long-term, engagement with the other programs that is happening around the world. I think it will help us to get a better understanding about the different form of literature that is happening, because we're still talking about, poetry, novel, and, the formal subjects of the literature, while in different part of the world, there is a lot of new forms that we need to be educated of.
I was thinking about what Nujoom was saying and what Salha was saying, and I do think that it is also very, very, very essential that the other sectors are also kind of supported with this push for literature. So we're looking at education, like Nujoom was saying. We're looking at programs, but I think there really needs to be the best thing you can do to support, or anyone can do to support writing, is support reading. And that begins, like she was saying, with education. It begins with these programs. And so from a policy standpoint, it has to be holistic with all of these sectors as well to support that. And also, you know, trade and entrepreneurship and all of the sectors together. It's really, really essential. So lots of work.
This has been a fascinating conversation, and I think a foundational conversation that I hope maybe in 2 years we can look back on and say, we've implemented some of this stuff. Thank you so much for your time and your insight. And if you'll join me in thanking our speakers today.